Welcome to Best of Reddit. Be sure to subscribe as we upload new content daily. Starting off today's revenge stories is this short story of revenge titled, "My homophobic stepmother was very mean and abusive towards me, so I had her work email flooded with newsletters and Scientology spam. So early this year, in the spring, I, 15-year-old male, was sent away from my parents to live with my biological father and his wife, who we will call Chris. Now at first, everything was fine despite my hesitations, but later on in my stay with them, Chris and her husband showed their true colors as being relatively abusive and very close-minded, which made me feel very unsafe and led to my mental health tanking so much I couldn't do things like eat or walk. Some examples of the things that they did to me include and are not limited to: Chris threatened to throw me and my possessions out of her house and force me to sleep in a tent outside of her house if I ever broke her microwave. Chris and my biodad took huge issue in me being gay, and tried to force me to see the light about why being gay was wrong by using a Bible to force me to realize that being gay was wrong and to confess that I really was gay to them because they felt that being gay was akin to being a pedophile. Tried to coerce me into saying that my real parents were abusive in order to force me into staying with them permanently. Both, mostly biodad, badmouthed my mother from time to time and tried to get me to dislike her while also simultaneously belittling me and insulting my intelligence on a regular basis. Prevented me from going to school because my school at the time was online, and Chris hated online school because she didn't want me to have the internet and she felt like online school was bullcrap. But nothing compares to the time where my biodad assaulted me and threatened me with knives, which forced me to call the police on him and Chris, after which they kept me prisoner inside of their house for around a week and tried to get me to confess to being a pedophile because Chris looked up child porn on her cell phone and said that I wanted to molest my siblings because I told her I was excited to go home. So naturally, when I got back to my real home, I was much more than a little bit peeved. For a good solid month afterwards I was stewing in my hatred and anger that I had both towards Chris and my biological father. Eventually though, I ended up snapping when I remembered how smug Chris looked and the things she stated before I was due to leave her home, and I decided that on some level, that evil witch had to pay. Even if I could only cause her a minor inconvenience, it would be very worth it to me. I remembered my stepmother's work email and home address, so over the course of several days I inputted that info into various website and shop accounts. Newsletters that will be delivered to you virtually at least once a day. Click. Wonder about Scientology and all of the wonderful things that it teaches. Click. Want to see some hot lesbians or gay men have oral or anal sex? Click. After I had done this, I bursted out giggling because I knew that Chris and her husband probably wouldn't catch on to who had done it and how to stop it from happening. You see, they were both very tech illiterate and had to receive help to even do the most basic things like put in a password for their phone. So, naturally, who's to say that they would figure it out that I was the one who signed my stepmother up for all of those things? Months passed afterwards, and I decided that I wanted to know what had happened after I had signed up Chris to all of those newsletter and gay porn subscriptions. I googled her name on the school directory that contained her email that I had used to sign her up for all of the gay stuff, and I couldn't find her name or work email listed anywhere. It was like she had never even existed at that school, because everything that was on that site about her was scrubbed clean. After I saw that, I bursted out laughing so hard I almost peed myself. It's been a while since I left the abuse, and I am much better mentally and physically with my mother and stepdad than I was living with Chris and her husband. Heck, I'm even thinking about taking dual enrollment classes at my local community college after I graduate my sophomore year, which was something that never would have happened had I stayed to live with Chris. So yeah. Hi family if you're reading this. And to Chris, if you ever end up reading or hearing about this Reddit post, you are a vile witch and you deserve that junk mail. Next we have a story of revenge sure to entertain titled, "Ex-Boss Forced to Shut His Company Down." This is a story from around 6 years ago, back when I was a gullible wee sod, which will explain a lot. I'd probably call this karmic revenge because I never planned for things to fall into place like they did. I got a job with a direct sales company in sunny Scotland that ran on a commission-only basis. Clients would hire us to sell for them and we did everything from credit cards to internet. We normally had portable pods we'd take into shopping centers, but sometimes we'd just be in the middle of busy streets. Some people often worked for the day and made zero cash, which meant folk were getting hired and quitting every week. I actually did pretty well though, and usually made more than I would working similar hours in an unskilled labor position. Boss took note of this and started mentioning an expansion into Australia, describing it as an untapped market for what we did. It would be a gold mine, he said. He told me he was planning to leave in a few months and wanted to bring decent salesmen along to hit the ground running while they looked for more local staff to build the team. If I proved my worth, I'd be invited. I worked harder than ever. Coming in early, staying late, and helped to train the noobs that came in without pay as time went by. Best efforts weren't fruitful though, and I still didn't have enough savings to get by for long by myself on the other side of the world. I told boss what I had and he said that would barely even be enough to pay for your flight, let alone the hotel and other living costs while we get established. I was actually under the impression getting invited meant they'd at least move me over there, so now I felt like this plan just didn't seem feasible anymore. I've learned to ask these questions well in advance now. Months of sweat down the drain. Boss said I couldn't give up and I had to do what was necessary to achieve my goals. I ate that crap up and he suggested I take out payday loans and bump phone, tablet contacts for the extra cash. Obviously that would put me in massive debt, but boss, who I considered a friend at this point, reassured me that I'd be making 10 times what I owed per month when we got to Oz. I trusted him enough to believe it, but still asked him if he would pay for my plane ticket if I couldn't afford to fly back after 6 months to be present for the birth of my daughter in Scotland. He said of course, but it was silly to think I'd be so poor I couldn't get home. I went through with the idea. The time came and we were ready to leave. Boss asked the regional manager to pay for my plane ride up front and dock my wages later because the ticket would have still eaten a third of my savings. Turned out I was the only one from Scotland besides boss and the regional manager going over. I was told it was because no one put the effort in I did and regional manager couldn't pay for everyone's ticket. Normally I'd have been really concerned, but boss was a pal now, so I just felt real special. On the way, it was revealed to me that we wouldn't actually be selling anything this time around. The only clients were a few global and local charities. What we'd be doing now was going door to door and convincing people to subscribe. I would have to get someone to sign up to donate a minimum of $40 a month for 2 years to get my commish. What? Again, I was reassured that, unlike Scotland, in the land down under everyone has loads of disposable income and they love charities. It would be a saunter for us. I managed to convince myself it wasn't so bad, and I actually got quite excited about doing something for charity like that. Things didn't take off as we'd hoped, and just 2 months in I was completely relying on income from the job to support myself. To my surprise, I'd been sharing a bunk bed with boss in hostels the whole time. He said it was just to save money, but I already knew he had no more than me because of our constant proximity. I worked 13 hours a day 6 days a week in the field, and even on my day off boss would always have something planned for the ever-changing team. I was a good sport and ended up being pretty well liked by anyone we brought on. Part of my job now was to participate in training everyone new except still for no pay. I wasn't in a position to argue, and since we were in this together I complied. I ended up doing most of the training, but at least I was making new friends. The next 4 months were awful. Boss and I eventually separated when we hired 2 other lads from the UK who I became close with. We stayed together and boss somehow had enough to stay in Airbnbs. Now meanwhile, I was living off noodles and sleeping in up to 24 bedrooms in hostels with the boys just to get by. We ironed our shirts on the floor and couldn't afford shoes to replace the ones soles were coming off of from the constant door knocking. Boss had become a bit of a pariah among the team because of his ugly attitude. I actually found his temper funny a lot of the time because it was never directed at me until it was, and the benefit of the doubt I'd given him no longer existed when it came time for me to go home for my daughter. I couldn't afford a bus, never mind a flight, and when I asked boss for the emergency handout he essentially said, "Tough cookies, I can't afford it." I missed the birth of my daughter and cried for days over how much of an idiot I was for trusting boss. I couldn't even risk leaving and not finding another job. I just had to save for as long as it took and go home. Shortly after this, boss declares he's now got the resources he needs to start planning a move to a different state where he can open his own office away from the regional manager. Of course, the team would have to follow, and at boss's request, I played a part in convincing most of them to go. I'd started living in robot mode and just became a yes man to get through the day. I also figured maybe the new location would reap more reward. Boss invested in a town office and spent what he had setting it up along with getting the clients sorted. Cue the Karmic revenge. It took 3 weeks for everyone to see boss's true colors, and I was particularly worn down. Part of the recruitment process involved the applicant shadowing myself or another member of the team for the day to show them sales, but when anyone came out with me I basically said, listen, you do not want this job, so, needless to say, but we didn't hire many locals. I had stayed in touch with a girl from the previous office who I had gotten close to, and she was more than happy to help me vent. She offered me a place to stay in her flat should I want to risk quitting and finding another job to get home. I'd just have to get back to the other side of the country with no money. We were so skint, the lads and I hacked a Hungry Jack's reward app to give us unlimited free value meals LMAO. FYI, we were paid 2 weeks in lieu, so I hatched a plan to wait until the wage from my first week in the new office came through before quitting. I had the strong feeling boss would withhold the remaining 2 weeks because he knew I couldn't fight it. I was right in the end. I also sat the team down in private one night and told them I was planning to quit for all these reasons. They were sad to hear I was leaving but completely understood. I quit the next day and used the wage I just got to pay for the way back to the other side of Oz. I did find another job in a coffee shop and had enough to fly home 3 months later. Then I completely rebuilt my life. I learned through the grapevine that every single member of staff quit within days of me leaving boss's office, meaning he had to shut down and hightail it back to the old one because of how much money he lost. I saw him running around a few times trying to catch buses with a clipboard and iPad like we did when we'd knock doors, so I'm assuming he couldn't hire any more staff either and had to do the groundwork all by himself. He never recovered from what I hear. Postscript. At the time this happened I didn't know what a pyramid scheme company was, but thankfully I'm wiser now. I discovered that boss made money, not from the client directly, but rather he got a percentage of every sale the team and I made, as did every superior he had. I never saw a dime for all the people I hired and trained. That explained why he could afford better lodging and ultimately an office. I'm now certain he could have afforded to send me on the flight back when I asked.